Versatile Mage. Chapter 606. City of Undead. Purple Alert. Isn't it over yet? Commander Lu Zhu landed on the tower. His eyes were completely bloodshot. His right arm was missing. Fresh blood from the cut stained the white cloth wrapping around it. He was supposed to wear a twisted smile, yet the smile he hid under his skinny face was gone, replaced by the terror and disbelief of realizing he had not woken up from the nightmare. Chief Military Instructor Fei Zhao, Senior Hunter Du Xiao, Commander Lu Zhu, and Councilman Zhu Meng, 4 super magicians, were looking at the land lit up by sunlight, at the undead that were still perfectly fine in the light. More of them violated all common sense as they burst out from the ground, acting as if the dark, bloody feast had just begun. A cry like a death knell came from the direction of the northern walls. The 4's gazes passed through the drizzle and saw a giant creature with large skeletal wings flying toward them from up close to the clouds. It grew bigger as it approached the walls. Its size was comparable to the tower on the northern walls. When its wings were fully extended, they produced a huge shadow, looming over the place like a cloud. People had no idea what it was, but when its eyes glanced at the tiny walls and humans in the city, terror began to spread rapidly like a plague, instantly covering half of City North. Mo Fan looked up in astonishment. The bone-winged creature's body looked like it was molded from mercury, clearly visible even when the creature was still miles away. It felt like even the smallest bone with a pointy end could easily puncture every magician on the walls. Nether Bone Ruler. Commander Lu Zhu finally uttered slowly after some time. Even as a super magician, he still felt a chill running down his spine when he mentioned the name, let alone seeing the scariest ruler of the undead with his own eyes. The Phantom Tyrant Emperor was a phantom, the ruler of the phantoms. Whenever it appeared, it would have countless phantoms surrounding it. The Nether Bone Ruler was a skeleton, the ruler of the skeletons. It was a super undead even more infamous than the Phantom Tyrant Emperor. Why did it wake up in the daytime? With a roar like a death knell, the Netherbone Ruler came to a stop a few kilometers away from the walls, floating in the air. The primary head out of its 3 was raised up high. Through the gaps between the bones around its throat, people could see black energy flickering inside its mouth. The sharp glow turned into a blast wave. The black death ray shot forward with a howl. Space began to tremble. The death ray traveled perfectly straight through the rain and the area outside the walls. In just a few seconds, the blast wave struck the wall a kilometer to the left of the tower. Darkness spread on its surface and devoured the sunlight. The northern walls turned dark gray where the death ray made contact, and in the next second, the sturdy rocks were entirely devoured by the darkness. It was a sound so loud that everything simply turned deadly quiet. Mo Fan was overwhelmed by the silence, yet his eardrums were on the verge of bursting from the vibrations. The death ray had taken away everyone's sight. They only knew that the giant walls were eaten away by something right before the darkness blinded them. The darkness did not last for long. When the light finally returned, the people on the tower reacted as if their souls were destroyed. With blank faces, they simply could not believe what they were seeing. The walls had disappeared. A huge section of the walls that was previously standing there like a mountain range had vanished. Tiny particles like dust slowly rose into the air, like wisps of floating steam. The truth was, the walls did not just disappear. They were turned into particles so light that they drifted into the air as the wind blew. Ash. Asshole. In the tower, a line of tears ran down the cheeks of a man covered in dust. I'm going to kill it. I'm going to fucking kill it. He ran out like he had gone mad, screaming in a hoarse voice. When Mo Fan saw the man seriously charging out of the tower, he immediately appeared beside him with fleeing shadow and grabbed onto him tightly. Are you trying to kill yourself? You're just a cockroach that can be killed with a single stomp by it. Snapped Mo Fan. Don't you fucking worry about me, let go, yelled Shorty. Mo Fan was clearly aware that Shorty was just going to get himself killed going down the tower. He cast giant shadow spike and restrained him close to the railing on the wall so the man would not do anything stupid. Shorty was still struggling. He even tried to overcome Mo Fan's giant shadow spike with his will, yet Mo Fan's spell was not something that could be easily overpowered, at least not when Shorty wasn't using any effective methods. "Let go of me, I'm begging you, let me go," yelled Shorty at the top of his voice. Mo Fan stood there and remained silent. Maybe Shorty did not mention anything, yet Mo Fan could easily tell from his extreme sorrow that there was a hospital close to the part of the walls that was destroyed. The death ray did not just destroy the wall. It also bulldozed the section from the wall to the hospital, like an enormous beast trampling across the place mercilessly. The wall had disappeared. The street had vanished, including the hospital, and Shorty's wife, who was in labor. "Mo Fan, I'm begging you, let go of me, if you still think of me as your friend," pleaded Shorty sorrowfully in tears, as he knew he could not break free from Mo Fan's spell. "I never thought of you as a friend, either." Mo Fan would not withdraw the giant shadow spike. Even Zhu Meng, Du Xiao, Lu Zhu, or Fei Zhao had no chance of stopping the death ray. Shorty would only add himself to the list of casualties. Perhaps adding one more death to the street that had now turned into dust would make no difference, but there were still many things that an intermediate magician could do. It was no longer a nightmare, but a real disaster, just like what had happened to Bo City. Back then, any intermediate magician was extremely important. Although an intermediate magician could not turn the tables, they could still save a few lives. An eerie purple glow arose slowly. It gradually loomed over the northern part of the city. Girls with special taste seemed to favor purple, thinking that the sight of a whole area covered in purple would be dazzling. But they would have to think twice about what they wished for, as the purple currently looming over the area was just a pleasing illusion right before death arrived. It would simply be their last desire in the world before all hope was lost. Purple. A purple alert. Mo Fan glanced into the distance. He could only see the buildings and streets in a square layout beyond, the area covered in the nightmarish purple. Chapter N. Versatile Mage. Chapter 607. Giant Ruler, the Mountain Zombie. The purple of death loomed over every corner in the city. Some old folk who had just woken up at dawn rubbed their eyes and said with a smile to their neighbor, "Hey old Zoo, I don't think I have many days left. My eyes are going nuts early in the morning." However, seeing that the old man next door also had a terrified look, the old man that had just woken up immediately realized something. The kids who had yet to reach the age to go to school were crying. The adults simply ignored their cries and carried on with their routines. However, they discovered that the street just 2 blocks away had completely vanished. Not long afterward, a purple glow descended from the sky. Their faces were completely blank, like never before. The teenagers who had gone to bed late rolled over in their beds, trying to get back to sleep. In the end, they finally ran out of patience and opened their windows to check what was going on out there. They simply saw purple and people running in its light. Cars jammed the streets. People abandoned the cars and ran on foot. Officials in uniforms were evacuating the civilians. Their first reaction was wondering whether they were having a dream, but when countless calls started ringing on their phones, they were thunderstruck. Purple. The alert that even the old folks who had spent half a century living in the ancient capital had never seen before. A new day was being welcomed with a boundless aura of death. Up on the tower, Mo Fan heard cries of the undead in the distance. They were even more shocking than those emitted that night. Beside him, Shorty, who had finally calmed down, dropped to his knees. Tears ran down his cheeks as he cried in grief. He was sobbing and mumbling, like he was seeking Mo Fan's comfort. "I was at the hospital last night. I heard that it was the best hospital for women in childbirth. I saw the gathering signal from the window, that's why I'm here. Normally, I wouldn't come, but I thought that when it all comes to an end, I can tell my son that on the day he was born, his dad was so brave, but now, it's all gone." "He might be a daughter," said Mo Fan, who was the worst when it came to comforting people. "Shut the fuck up," yelled Shorty. "Maybe they are not dead. Maybe she had premature labor, and they went home earlier, since we were fighting for such a long time," added Mo Fan. The words barely calmed Shorty down. The whole tower was exhausted. Everyone had just gone through a great victorious fight that they assumed would surely be recorded in the history of mankind. However, what followed was despair crashing down on them like a tsunami. No one knew what they should do, whether to protect the walls that were already blasted open, or leave with the civilians that were clumped together like porridge in a pot. Beyond them, the undead outnumbered the living several times over. They were no longer roaming aimlessly, but advancing like an ocean. A massive skeletal creature with bone wings was circling around in the sky, glancing down at the city that it could easily annihilate like ants. Humans were too petty in its eyes. It could even eliminate magicians with ease. It let out a roar from high in the sky, commanding the undead to rise from the graves. Their sinister white bones were everywhere. In the far distance, an enormous zombie like a mountain appeared out of nowhere among the sea of undead. The quake produced from each step it took spread all the way to the city. The city walls that were as sturdy as a steel barrel were trembling under its footsteps. The mountain zombie was responding to the Netherbone ruler's cry. Its figure was like a towering banner, millions of zombies crowding around it. The number of those crawling out from the ground and coming from the distance in the north was enough to fill the horizon. The drizzle had become heavier, forming a grey curtain between heaven and earth. Together with the endless undead, a giant web was forming, slowly drawing in toward the city. Du Xiao, don't be ridiculous. Advisor Zhu hauled senior hunter Du Xiao back. The three leaders, Zhu Meng, Fei Zhao, and Lu Zhu, were in bad shape, like all the others. They did not even have the chance to treat their injuries. The Phantom Tyrant Emperor was only a small ruler among the undead, yet it took 4 of them to barely kill it, at the cost of severe injuries. Meanwhile, the Netherbone ruler was a lot stronger than the Phantom Tyrant Emperor. Even at full strength, they had little chance of defeating it, let alone when they were all worn out and injured. Now the mountain zombie, around 50 kilometers away, that was the real big ruler. That guy is most likely from the same era as the Black Totem Snake. Listen to the orders from higher up. Immediately retreat to the barrier inside the city. Any of us dying here will result in 10 times the casualties in the future. Zhu Meng displayed his calm as a councilman. However, the veins on his fist were knotted. He was the initiator of the threat elimination strategy, yet he was totally unaware of this disaster before it happened. How was this possible? Why were the undead able to move freely in the daytime? And why were there more of them than at night? So many undead had appeared out of nowhere. Did this mean the king of the kingdom of undead had risen? The thing that had been asleep for thousands of years just happened to rise today. Zhu Meng, Mo Fan called out to the councilman with a stern face. You should run too. Leave the walls. Let's hope that the barrier is enough to protect us this time. Zhu Meng let out a sigh. He seemed very old all of a sudden. It had been so long since so many undead appeared close to the ancient capital. They should have expected this to happen when the undead had been misbehaving lately, yet they were hoping it was only a coincidence. Where could the people run to during a purple alert? What chance did they have to survive? Even the magicians had trouble staying alive with the god of death hunting them down, let alone the commoners. Even if he wanted to step forward bravely to save the residents on the streets, he sometimes did not even have the right to die a martyr's death because of his position. He had to stay alive, or the people would lose all hope. I know I should be running, but I have to tell you what I feel. Mo Fan lowered his voice. His face was harder than ever before. Go ahead, said Zhu Meng with a deep look. Bo City, you must know I come from Bo City. I don't care if you believe me or not, but I can smell the Black Vatican. Mo Fan said coldly. The Black Vatican? Why so? Zhu Meng was astounded. The rain, said Mo Fan. Zhu Meng was startled. The rain. Was he saying that the undead were only able to remain active in the sunlight because of the rain that had just started not long ago? The ancient capital had been drenched in rain before, yet he had never heard that the undead would turn so wild. Chapter N. Versatile Mage. Chapter 608. City in Grave Danger. I don't know how the Black Vatican did it, but it's exactly the same method they used on Bow City. It happened out of nowhere, and it was during a heavy rain too, enraging all the demon creatures. Perhaps you might think that the rain was just a coincidence, but I think they're related. Something like this doesn't happen for no reason. Natural disasters like these must have a human conspiracy behind them. Said Mo Fan. The ancient capital had been safe for so many years. Mo Fan would not believe that the current century was this full of disasters. If it wasn't because God wanted to punish humans, then it must be some sort of conspiracy aiming to lead mankind to destruction. Mo Fan admitted that he had no proof to justify his statement. He was only following his instincts. However, after the calamity of Bow City, and being involved in the Black Vatican's conspiracy once, if he hadn't held on to the underground holy spring that the Black Vatican desperately wanted to acquire, they would still be hidden in the dark among the people. No one could have torn their mask off. Come with us, otherwise you might not make it to the inner walls safely. Zhu Meng believed Mo Fan's words. Not long ago, Zhu Meng had spent some time trying to learn what the Black Vatican was up to. They had been behaving strangely in many places across the nation, yet they were extremely quiet here around the ancient capital, as if they had been wiped out, just like the Magic City. However, the quieter they were, the more likely it was that they were up to something, as they were so cautious that they could not allow any of their blue deacons or grey priests to leak their conspiracy. Mo Fan shook his head. He did not tell Zhu Meng about his experience just so Zhu Meng would bring him along. He was only hoping that his information would help the higher-ups make the right call. Then why are you staying here? The army of undead is going to overrun the outer walls soon. Everything outside of the inner walls barrier is lost. The purple alert means that even magicians cannot survive inside the barrier. Zhu Meng grabbed Mo Fan. It was clear that he was going to bring Mo Fan along with brute force. I still have some friends in City North. I'll withdraw to the barrier with them. Mo Fan said sternly. Zhu Meng loosened his grip when he saw the determined look in Mo Fan's eyes. I'll send someone. It's fine, I can take care of them myself. Your men are precious now, go and save the people you should. The effort I've put in over these years isn't just so I can do nothing in a disaster like what happened to Bow City, said Mo Fan. Yao Nan stood beside Mo Fan. He glanced at Mo Fan and said, "It's true that the people of Bow City are extremely courageous when anyone mentions the Black Vatican. We still don't know if they are involved," said Mo Fan. It's very likely. The information that the Klersky Hunter Agency has collected trying to hunt Salon down all leads here to the ancient capital, but we were too late. Yao Nan tapped Mo Fan on the shoulder and came to a realization. Who would have thought that it would turn out like this? I've been hearing how scary the Red Cardinal Salon is, and now, standing on these walls that will be overrun by the army of undead soon. I'm afraid I will never forget the name. Salon. Mo Fan repeated the name, thinking deeply. It was not the first time he heard it. My energy hasn't recovered yet. I won't be able to help. See you on the inner walls, said Yao Nan to Mo Fan. See you on the walls. The truth was, many people were also telling each other they would see them on the walls. The magicians had gathered together to secure a victory for the battle, yet they were going to lose half of the city. Everyone had people they wanted to look for in the chaos. Instead of losing hope here, they would rather head out as soon as possible. Therefore, the few words were all that mattered. It was a blessing, a hope, but more like bidding farewell. In addition to the northern walls, the same purple alert was sounded in 3 other directions. The outer walls could not hold any longer. After all, the outer walls were surrounding the whole city. It was difficult to defend all directions at the same time due to its wide area. On top of that, the number of undead had long surpassed that of the living. If they continued to hold their positions on the walls, everyone would be devoured and surrounded by the sea of undead. When the purple alert was sounded, it meant everyone was required to retreat back to the barrier as fast as possible. Mo Fan remembered that during a blood alert, the commoners basically had zero chance of surviving outside the barrier. Even magicians would have trouble surviving. Run! The whole ancient capital had come to an agreement that they should retreat and flee for their lives. Every city had a last line of defense, its barrier. The ancient capital's barrier was the inner walls, with a perimeter of 14 kilometers. Above the densely packed streets and zones, one could barely see the golden flicker from the barrier above the inner walls. Meanwhile, Mo Fan could see people in the form of black dots fleeing toward the inner walls. The roads were jammed with vehicles, and helicopters were in the sky providing assistance. Bo City was even smaller than city north of the ancient capital. The city had been around for centuries, its population was almost 100 times that of Bo City. And now, the entire population was racing against time. How many of them would reach the inner walls before they were devoured by the army of undead? The sound of the ground quaking mixed with the shocking cries and swept from behind like a storm. Not many people dared to turn around. The number of undead was a lot greater than what the magicians had imagined. The force generated from their march toward the city alone was enough to set the walls and buildings on the verge of collapse. Mo Fan summoned his courage and turned around to take a glance. Black, white, gray, zombies, corpse generals, skeletons, skeleton generals, phantoms, and phantom generals covered the entire area densely. The ground was trembling as they moved. Creatures of enormous size stood out among the undead. Anyone could easily see them in the black tide of undead like a crane in a flock of chickens. The tide consisting of zombies, phantoms, and skeletons would split in half and continue flowing around them as if they were reefs in a river. The most terrifying sight was still the nether bone ruler circling in the air, who had destroyed the walls with a single breath of death. It was an intelligent creature, fully focused on destroying the walls that were stopping its people from entering the city. A few kilometers of the northern walls had collapsed. The towers crumbled to the ground one after another. The line of defense that humans had relied on to protect them could not withstand a single blow from it. Mo Fan had no idea what terrifying creatures had appeared in the other directions, but from Zhu Meng, Du Xiao, Fei Zhao, and the others' terrified expressions, he could tell that the skeleton ruler was still not the most terrifying creature. The actual creature that had forced the super magicians to run for their lives was the mountain giant zombie, capable of commanding all undead. The creature was standing in the midst of the tide of undead like a mountain. Its eyes, so high and proud, in the sky, were emitting an icy glow, staring at the city that was in grave danger a few dozen kilometers away. Chapter N. Versatile Mage. Chapter 609. Zombies from above. The mountain zombie took a step forward. Its movement was fairly slow, yet each step it took brought it much closer to the city. The head in the rain was moving closer. Somehow, the creature had already advanced over 10 kilometers. If there was anything providing some relief to the humans, it would be the discovery that the creature halted its movement for some reason around 10 kilometers away from the walls. A fat corpse official, looking like a lump of flesh, stood close to the creature's feet. Its size was like a hill, yet it only reached just below the mountain zombie's knees. The flesh-mound corpse official had a giant mouth. It opened its mouth and swallowed the surrounding skeletons, zombies, and phantoms inside. It managed to hold more than 1,000 undead. Mo Fan did not dare to watch any further upon seeing this. Even though he was clueless about why the corpse official was eating the undead, there was no time for him to think about it. He had to find Lu Ru, Zhang Xiaoho, and the others as soon as possible, and retreat to the inner walls together. Mo Fan, what should we do now? Zhou Ming glanced at Mo Fan with a hint of panic. Come with me, said Mo Fan sternly. I must go to Bo City Street. I don't want to be involved in the same thing twice. Mubai said in a deep voice. Yeah, Mo Fan, we can't leave them behind, said Zhou Ming. Let's head to Bo City Street first, Mo Fan nodded. As Mubai had stated, the people of Bo City had already gone through a similar disaster once. They had barely survived the first time. It would be too cruel if they died in this one. Mo Fan knew he could only bring a limited number of people along. However, since Zhang Xiaohou and Lu Ru were going in the same direction too, he could not leave them behind. Count me in, Shorty said to Mo Fan, slowly getting to his feet. Mo Fan glanced at Shorty, who was still overwhelmed with grief, and nodded. It seemed like he had thought it through. The dead could not be resurrected. It was important to look after himself in chaos like this, before he had the ability to look after others. Then let's hurry up. A bunch of undead that was roaming close to the walls has already invaded the city. The walls were heavily damaged. More undead are going to break through. Mubai, do you have any relatives in City North? Said Zhou Ming. Only my uncle, but I believe he's quite close to the inner walls. He mentioned that he was heading into the inner walls to attend to some business, said Mubai. That's good to know. To Bo City Street, let's hope they are not too scattered across the place. Bo City Street is a fair distance away from the inner walls. With how the traffic is tied up now, they won't be able to reach the inner walls safely, the worried Zhou Ming told him. Transportation was completely at a standstill. Even magicians were forced to travel on foot. Even with wind magicians, everyone was still moving slowly. Meanwhile, the undead that had invaded the city were chasing after them at full speed. These bloodthirsty creatures would simply chase after anything alive and tear them apart. Fresh blood mixed with rain soon dyed the area close to the beleaguered walls red. Several teams of magicians were evacuating the civilians, yet regardless of how hard they were blasting the undead with magic, the undead were rushing into the city through the gap faster than they were dying. The battle mages were gradually losing ground. Although it did help slow down the invasion, Mo Fan was well aware that those fighting could at most buy a little time for the civilians. When the Netherbone ruler's army of skeletons or the mountain zombies' tide of zombies arrived, every magician would be torn into pieces. Mo Fan, Zhou Ming, Mubai, and Shorty hurried over to Bo City Street. Everyone in the group was an intermediate magician, thus they were a lot fitter than the commoners. Since the streets were stuffed full of cars and fleeing crowds, the roofs became their path instead. The densely packed buildings allowed them to run along the walls and travel across rooftops. Mo Fan, isn't your energy fully recovered yet? I've got some serums here that will help your recovery. Mubai took out some serums he had brought along and handed them to Mo Fan. Thanks a lot. Mo Fan was in dire need of energy. As a magician with 4 elements, he had twice the amount of energy compared to an ordinary magician, so it was rare for him to deplete his energy. Luckily, he had retreated to the walls with Yao Nan earlier, allowing him to rest up for a little bit. Otherwise, his energy would be pretty much empty now. He would most likely die to the undead, let alone be able to save others. As they passed by the hospital that was bulldozed to the ground, Mo Fan purposely glanced at Shorty. Shorty did not hesitate at all. It was clear that he had experienced situations of life and death too often. He had only lost his mind just then because it was someone extremely important to him. There was nothing Shorty could do after a person's death. Since he was still alive, he had to try his best to stay that way. At our speed, we should be able to retreat to the inner walls before this whole place is overrun by the undead, said Shorty. Shorty was more familiar with the ancient capital than anyone else there. With him leading the way, the group would reach Bo City Street in the shortest time, and could escort the people of Bo City to the safe zone. That's a relief. I feel sorry for the people that live close to the outer walls. Zhou Ming was full of sorrow as she witnessed the death of countless innocent people. It was likely that in less than an hour after the purple alert was sounded, the casualties close to the outer walls had already surpassed the total casualties of the calamity of Bo City. On top of that, The number was increasing rapidly as they spoke. What's that thing in the sky? Is that a lump of meat? How is it as huge as a building? It has eyes. Oh my, it looks so terrifying. The crowd on the streets cried in panic, prompting the others to raise their heads and stare at the giant object sweeping past in the sky above the buildings. Mo Fan also raised his head and discovered the giant lump of flesh just as it crashed onto the intersection not far away, like a meaty meteorite. The intersection was full of vehicles, but when the lump of flesh landed on the ground, it occupied the entire intersection, smashing the surrounding buildings into pieces with the impact. Mo Fan stared at the giant mound of flesh in astonishment. The thing looked very familiar to him. Wasn't it the flesh mound corpse official that ate more than 1,000 undead close to the mountain zombie's feet from before? The flesh mound corpse official had dropped out of the sky. Did that mean the mountain zombie had tossed it into the city? That creature was more than 10 kilometers away. As Mo Fan watched stunned with wide eyes, a bad feeling crossed his heart. As he thought, the flesh mound corpse general that he was staring at suddenly opened its mouth, and the countless skeletons, zombies, and phantoms it had eaten before burst out from its stomach like a surging tide. The streets promptly filled with screams. The crowd that had finally started to retreat in order began to panic again, trampling, shoving, and pushing one another. Mo Fan was aghast. He looked up into the sky. The same kinds of giant flesh mound corpse generals were hurtling in from the distance and crashing into the city randomly, like great bombs of flesh. Mo Fan felt his scalp going numb. No one expected that the mountain zombie would simply toss these flesh mound corpse generals into the city, transporting thousands of undead onto the streets. It was going to deal a deadly blow to the civilians who were fleeing for their lives. Chapter N. Versatile Mage. Chapter 610. Imperial Magicians. The streets ahead are filled with undead. What's going on? Yelled Mu Bai. The remaining walls should be able to hold the undead army off for some time, yet why were the streets already filled with so many phantoms, zombies, and skeletons? They were simply chasing and tearing away at any human they stumbled into. The streets were immediately covered in corpses. Run, quick, or else the corpse official will be targeting us. Shorty yelled at the other three. As he shouted, the eyes of the flesh mound corpse official, which had just disgorged over 1,000 undead, slowly moved in the direction. It was clear that the creature was able to specifically detect the presence of magicians. The group knew that they stood no chance against a commander-level undead with the current strength. They were left with no choice but to flee for their lives. If the corpse official decided to hunt them down, it would be too late for them to run away. The four immediately headed for the alleyway nearby, using the buildings for cover. Above them, only a tiny glimpse of the sky could be seen in the narrow alleyway. They could still catch a glimpse of the flesh mound corpse officials hurtling across the rainy sky, being thrown deeper into the city. If each of the flesh mound corpse officials were able to carry over 1,000 undead inside them, in just a few minutes, the undead would simply fill every corner of the city. The scene was absolutely terrifying. Even magicians had to flee like mice. It was not an exaggeration to describe the ancient capital as on the verge of being overrun. The rain continued to fall, but the giant golden barrier looming over the inner city provided no resistance to the raindrops. It continued to fall on the streets, covering the historical buildings in the ancient capital. A bell tower stood at the heart of the city. A golden beam of light was rising off it into the sky, serving as the main pillar of the golden barrier opening up like an umbrella above. The arc-shaped light fell right on the perimeter of the inner walls. In addition to that, the four corners of the walls also had light formations supporting it. The entrance to the inner city was wide open. A huge crowd was pushing their way through the entrance. The only reason they were able to escape was because they were not far from the inner walls when the purple alert was sounded. The inner walls were not huge, but they were protected by the magic barrier. The seemingly ordinary walls were fairly sturdy. Even commander-level creatures would have a hard time knocking them down. At the north entrance of the inner walls, The Yuan gate that was normally not open to the public was currently occupied by many magicians. The authorities standing on the observation corridor above the Yuan gate were frowning while they waited for the Magic Association to make a decision. Below the tower, loud curses were rising. Even the most unpleasant words were being shouted now. When the terrified crowd saw the people standing in the tower on standby, they simply assumed the authorities had no intention of eliminating the undead invading the city. They felt that these magicians were not worthy of respect. They were only a bunch of cold-blooded animals concerned about looking after themselves. "Captain, the people are just going to be more disappointed if we wait any longer," blurted out a young Imperial magician in panic. Their curses were extremely unpleasant to the ears, leaving the magician who was not as focused as the others flushed red. Weren't magicians supposed to step forward at times like this, especially the Imperial magicians, referred to as the honorable magicians by the people of the ancient capital? The Imperial magicians were the elite members from the Magic Association, comparable to the magicians of the Magic Palace. Every single Imperial magician was an elite specifically chosen from different places. Their squad was also known as the Shield of the City. However, these Imperial magicians were ordered to stand here at the inner walls instead. They could not do anything apart from watching the city fall to massive destruction, while the undead were devouring the outer walls like a black tide, covering the streets, the buildings, the open areas, and the crowd. "Zhao Feng, stay calm," snapped another Imperial magician. "But aren't you seeing this too? If we continue to hide here instead of driving the undead out of the city, we are not worthy to be called Imperial magicians," yelled Zhao Feng in agitation. The purple and gold-robed captain of the Imperial magicians simply cast a cold glance at the man called Zhao Feng without saying a word. A messenger rushed up to the magicians quickly and blurted out a few words into the ears of the captain. The captain raised his head. His sharp eyes glanced at the flesh-mound corpse officials scattered across the streets, the parks, the shopping malls, and the buildings coldly. "All Imperial magicians, listen up." The captain suddenly spoke up, his voice ringing out as firmly as the sound of iron being forged. At that instant, the magicians in purple robes came to attention. Even the cold raindrops falling from the sky were turning into ice before their auras. Only advanced magicians were allowed to join the Imperial magicians. How terrifying was the aura produced when a bunch of advanced magicians focused. "Eliminate the flesh-mound corpse officials," the captain ordered loudly. As soon as the command was given, it turned out that a third of the Imperial magicians had the ability to fly. They either drew star constellation to summon wind wings, or activated their wing magical equipment and soared into the sky. The well-trained magicians instantly formed into groups of 3 and flew straight for the flesh-mound corpse officials. Corpse officials were creatures that normally required a group of advanced magicians to eliminate them, yet these Imperial magicians in purple robes only split into groups of 3. They were utterly fearless facing the corpse officials that continued to fall from the sky. An advanced magician would either possess the ability to fly or have mounts to travel around. Those who were unable to fly were not slow, either. They were traveling across the roofs and the tall buildings, flying across the skies above the crowd. As soon as the Imperial magicians moved out, a loud cheer immediately arose. The purple-robed advanced magicians flew into the distance and soon arrived in all corners of the huge city. The captain of the Imperial magicians stayed on the tower. His gaze never left the scene before him. The messenger from before was still standing beside him. He could not help but ask, "Lu Huan, if I'm not mistaken, your family should be in City South." Captain Lu Huan nodded. "Any news?" asked the messenger. Lu Huan shook his head. The messenger fell silent. He glanced at Lu Huan's determined face, which was still filled with worry. Most of the time, those in crucial positions were the ones without the freedom to act independently. As the strongest super magician at an Yuan gate, his job was to kill the bone creature in the sky when it approached. Apart from that, he was not allowed to go anywhere, or do anything. He had seen lots of fresh blood being shed, and the piles of bodies on the ground. As a super magician, he could have saved them easily with a super spell, yet he could not do it. Expending his energy might save those people's lives, but it might also make him lose to the Netherbone ruler. Once he lost, it would no longer just be a group of people dying, but the whole city. Chapter end. Please guys like, comment, share, and subscribe.